We now move to topical questions. Question number 1, Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the main cost implications are of the policies outlined in pensions in an independent Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Nicola Sturgeon.
The financial implications of the policy commitments made in the paper Pensions in an Independent Scotland are set out in Annex B to that paper. The cost of delaying the UK Government's planned increase in state pension age to 67 from 2026 will, of course, depend on the specific recommendations of the expert commission proposed to be established in the first year of an independent parliament. And I would remind members that independence is the only way to ensure that the future state pension age in Scotland is determined according to specific Scottish circumstances, not imposed by Westminster, regardless of Scottish circumstances. And I would also remind members, Presiding Officer, that in terms of the most recent figures for GDP per head, an independent Scotland would be the 8th richest country in the OECD and well able to afford a high-quality pension system.
Gavin Brown.
Helpfully, I have Annex B in front of me from the document. What would be the cost of setting up a separate Scottish pensions regulator?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as Gavin Brown, I would assume, knows, an independent Scotland would not only have to take a share of the liabilities of the UK, but would also be entitled to a share of the assets of the UK. The paper sets out in some detail how we would seek to work with the pensions regulator in a transitional way, while of course having the intention to set up a separate Scottish regulator to oversee pensions, to ensure that people in Scotland get access to good quality protection for their pensions. The problem, I think, for those on the no side of this argument is that they fail to recognise that in the UK right now, including in Scotland, there is something of a pensions crisis caused by many years of bad decision-making by successive Westminster governments. I know Gavin Brown's party is not specifically responsible for Gordon Brown's raid on the pensions industry, but the benefit of independence is to ensure that we get the decision-making powers here in Scotland, to ensure that not only can we continue to pay people's pensions in full and on time as set out in this paper, but that we can also take decisions that protect people for the future and ensure that we've got a decent pension system for generations to come.
Gavin Brown.
A rather long and, if I may say so, rehearsed answer to a very simple question of what would be the cost of a separate Scottish pensions regulator. The Cabinet Secretary pointed me specifically to Annex B. I have Annex B in front of me, and the answer is not there. So can I ask her again, what would be the cost of setting up a separate Scottish pensions regulator?
Cabinet Secretary.
The pensions regulator right now, as Gavin Brown is aware, covers not just Scotland but the rest of the UK. Now, we would negotiate with that regulator for a transition that would lead to the establishment of a separate Scottish regulator, and the costs of that would be covered and negotiated in terms of that transition. But Gavin Brown seems to want to ignore the fact that right now people in Scotland contribute to the cost of these UK bodies. They're not provided free gratis by the UK government. The costs of all of these things are provided through Scottish taxpayers' money. What we want to do in Scotland is ensure that we have the ability to use Scottish taxpayers' money to provide the kind of pensions for our older people and the protection for pensions for our older people that people in Scotland have a right to expect. Protection and assurance that they do not have currently within the UK.
Gavin Brown.
Not sure the answer is any clearer than it was when I first asked. Finally then, the Scottish Government sets out 30 policy proposals in Annex A of the document. 30 policy proposals. By my reckoning, well, they only claim that 4 of them are actually costed in Annex B, to which she rightly refers. Only 1 of them actually has any numbers or costings at all. Does she think it is acceptable for the Scottish Government to be taken seriously by publishing 30 proposals but only costing 1 out of 30?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, if Gavin Brown wants to go through the proposals, he will see that they cover a range of things, including doing what UK governments fail to do right now, which is give people access to the kind of information they need to plan their pensions for the longer term. These are the sensible recommendations that mean that we can plan properly for a decent pension system, and one that not just this generation but future generations can have confidence in. The specific spending implications of this paper are set out in Annex B. And I'm proud of the fact that, for example, that unlike the UK government right now, this government wants to retain savings credit, something that the current UK government wants to take away from older people, which would affect the lowest paid pensioners in Scotland. So this is a comprehensive paper setting out, not just in state pensions, but in public pensions and private pensions, how we can do things better for pensions in an independent Scotland. And if Gavin Brown had the ambition for a decent system, instead of just meekly accepting the cuts and the erosion to people's pensions from UK governments, then he might actually engage with this paper as opposed to having the kind of nonsense we've just heard from him this afternoon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that, according to the Office of National Statistics, a more reliable and robust source of data than the Office for Budget Responsibility, Scotland's older population is growing more slowly, and our dependency ratio, the number of children and pensioners per 1,000 members of the working population, will increase at a lower rate than the UK, at least until 2030, and that what that means is that pensions are not only affordable but sustainable in an independent Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say to that is that Scotland has an ageing population, like most countries in the Western world have ageing populations. I actually think we bemoan that fact far too much. That is a good thing. But those who try to perpetrate the myth that Scotland's population is somehow uniquely ageing or ageing faster than the rest of the UK are simply wrong. If you look at the figures between 2010 and 2035, the number of people in state pension age in the UK will increase by 28%. The increase in Scotland is 26%. So let's put this in context and let's actually have some facts and figures that are accurate around this debate, as opposed to the ones that the parties on the other sides of the chamber want to put forward. So Scotland can more than afford a decent pension system. I would repeat the point I made in my opening answer. An independent Scotland would be the 8th richest country in the OECD. Yeah. The question is, are we going to access our wealth as a country to provide decent pensions for our older people? That, in my view, is the benefit of being an independent country in charge of your own affairs.
Ken McIntosh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister told me in May that an independent Scotland would not try to secure any opt-out from EU pension regulation. He then told the Sunday Post in August that actually the reverse was true, that he would seek a derogation. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister to clarify which of these conflicting options is true, and what is she doing to secure the best outcome?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I suggest that Ken McIntosh actually reads the paper and reads the extensive material in the paper around the particular issue of the European cross-border directive? It sets out a common sense position that says that it would be not just in the interests of the Scottish Government, but overwhelmingly in the interests of the UK Government to have sensible transitional arrangements in place. And for those on the other side of this argument who somehow say that that wouldn't be possible, then they have to confront the fact that that would be as much of a problem for the UK Government as it would be for the Scottish Government, by the very definition of cross-border schemes being cross-border on both sides of that particular border. So this paper sets out in detail the common sense position and repeats the call we have made before, which echoes the call by ICAS for the UK Government to enter into sensible discussions now with the Scottish Government and with the European Commission so that we can come to an agreement on this matter, which I would imagine everybody in this chamber would welcome.
Mulroney.
Given that we might expect our governments, this one and future ones, to make some progress on life expectancy in the next 20 years, and given that Ireland, places like Ireland, have a pension age of 68, is it possible that her expert group might report back with a higher pension age?
I think that would be unlikely to the point of inconceivable, given the lag right now in terms of life expectancy in Scotland. Now, I stand here as a former Health Secretary, about to no one in the view that we should be doing everything possible to not just improve life expectancy in Scotland, but to narrow the gap in life expectancy in different parts of Scotland and between Scotland and the other parts of the UK. But everybody knows these things take time. And the question, I think, for Mr Rennie's party, for the Conservatives, and probably particularly for Labour, who left office with a commitment only to go to a pension age of 67 in 2035, but now find themselves parroting the Tory Liberal policy. The question is, why should people in Scotland who contribute the same into pensions get less out because of a lower life expectancy? So let us have the ability, with independence, to look at this through an expert commission and set proposals for the appropriate rate of increase to pension age in Scotland, rather than have one imposed on us by Westminster, totally regardless of the circumstances that we find ourselves in here in Scotland.
Bruce Smith.
Officer, and on that very point, isn't it the case that the Scottish Government attempted to suggest yesterday that an earlier retirement age could be afforded without providing any evidence of how it would be paid for? Can the Deputy First Minister explain to me how she can determine that something is affordable without knowing what it would cost? And specifically on the figure of £6 billion, which is being quoted by experts, the Deputy First Minister has described this figure as exaggerated. How does she know a figure is exaggerated if she has no figure in mind?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I say to Drew Smith, firstly, we base what we say on the affordability of pensions by what we know in the here and now. And we know that pensions right now are more affordable in Scotland than they are in the UK. They take up a smaller proportion of our national wealth. It stands to reason, and I don't think this should challenge anybody in the chamber, that if I'm saying we need an expert commission to look at the appropriate pace of the increase in the retirement age beyond 66, then the precise cost of that would depend on the specific recommendations that were made. In other words, how many years the increase in retirement age beyond 66 is delayed by. But, you know, the credibility problem for Labour on this issue is massive, with the greatest of respect. You know, I saw comments the other day from Alistair Darling criticising the Scottish Government for not wanting to see, or having grave reservations about the increase in retirement age to 67 by 2026. When Alistair Darling was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he supported a policy that wouldn't have had retirement age go to 67 until 2035. So when did that change? When did Labour simply start parroting the policy of the Tories? You know, it's not now simply the case that Labour defends the Tory right to make these decisions for Scotland. Labour is now meekly accepting whatever the Tories say these decisions should be. It's something that I think is met with dismay across the country, and the sooner Labour finds the ability to speak with its own voice in these issues, I think the better for everybody.
Question number 2, Kezia Dugdale.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to address the shortage of supply teachers.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I welcome Kezia Dugdale to her new role. This is the first time I think we've met in the Chamber, and I hope we'll have a positive exchange for the benefit of Scotland's children and learners. Some local authorities are experiencing challenges in relation to supply teachers. There are 3 issues. Firstly, more new teachers are securing full-time contracts, so there are fewer available for supply. Secondly, teacher unemployment in Scotland is lower than it has been since 2005. And thirdly, the impact of the 2011 pay agreement. We've already taken steps to address all of these. We increased the number of student teachers by 300 in 2012, by a further 370 in 2013, and I will continue to monitor the situation on an annual basis. The EIS is currently balloting its members on a pay offer which will improve pay for teachers undertaking supply work.
Kezia Dugdale.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am indeed new to the role, so before coming to the Chamber today, I looked over the other occasions where this issue had come to the Chamber, and the Cabinet Secretary constantly reminded us in the Chamber that he was monitoring the situation and that it was under constant regular review. Could he therefore tell us which local authorities are facing shortages of supply, in what subjects, and what specifically he's doing to help those local authorities who are struggling to put teachers in front of classes full of children?
Cabinet Secretary.
It is a matter for each individual education authority to meet the teacher supply issue. The FOI publication last week that the BBC used pointed, for example, to South Ayrshire Council, which was difficulty in finding English teachers for my own school, Mar College. That is a problem for South Ayrshire Council, and South Ayrshire Council have to address that by manpower planning of one sort or the other. The job of government is to make sure that there is a sufficient supply of teachers coming through, but not an oversupply, because, as the member will know if she's looked back on this issue, one of the issues that we've had to address again and again is the difficulty of teacher unemployment. So we've tried to bring the supply of teachers into balance. Now, there have always been areas and subjects in which there is a difficulty in providing enough recruits. What we do in those circumstances is to make sure that the recruitment process of universities is targeted towards those shortage subjects. And indeed, there will be a further report on that in December in teacher workforce planning, so that we can make sure that those subjects are addressed.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. I'm not sure it will come as much comfort to those in Murray Council at the moment who are describing the problems at getting supply teachers as chaotic, and I would encourage the Cabinet Secretary to look very closely at what's happening in Murray at the moment. He mentioned the EIS pay ballot, and the EIS are currently going through the process of the ballot at the moment. Can he tell the Chamber whether his offer to supply teachers will stand if EIS members reject the McCormick ballot process?
Well, I would remind the member that it is not my offer to supply teachers. The method of agreeing terms and conditions and salary in the teaching workforce is a tripartite one. It is an agreement between the unions, local government employers and government. So the offer was agreed by all three, and indeed the offer, the issue in 2011, when changes were made, was agreed by all three, including, and it's an important point, by the EIS, who accepted the change of terms and conditions to supply teachers. Now, there is now a new offer on the table. I hope that offer is accepted. I'm not going to try and influence the ballot by going into the detail of it here, but I will say that I do think it is an offer which, in the circumstances, is the right one. It has been agreed by the parties. Now it is up to the members of the union to decide whether they wish to take it or not. But it is important, in Murray Council as in other councils, that those councils undertake robust workforce planning, are able to make sure that their workforce is available across the board, and if there's shortages, to fill them, and also to make sure that they're employing enough teachers. And that's a very important issue, because we have heard some silent voices from one or two local authorities talking about teacher numbers. We have a national agreement on teacher numbers with COSLA. It is obvious that we have and need to have that number of teachers, and we should continue to have them.
George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary welcome the recent figures showing that teacher unemployment is at its lowest in 8 years? And can he tell me what exactly the reasons for this is?
Cabinet Secretary.
I very much welcome that. The August claimant count figures were the lowest in education since the records began, the series of records began in 2005. There were difficulties with teacher unemployment from 2008 and 10. I do strongly believe, and I've said that before in this chamber, this was the result of artificially high and unsustainable teacher numbers in 2006-7. We took the difficult decision that we had to move on from that. We've made a shared commitment to local government now to maintain teacher numbers in line with pupil numbers. Those actions have enabled us to rebalance teacher employment at a more sustainable level. More new teachers, that is post-probationers, and remember we have a unique offer in Scotland of probation in teaching, which means everybody who qualifies as a teacher is entitled to a year in the classroom as a probationer. But more new teachers, 75% of post-probationary teachers in permanent or temporary employment in publicly funded schools in September 2011. That's an increase from 66% in 2011, and there's always a flexibility, Presiding Officer, because there always need to be teachers available to take up posts as they become available during the year. And over the last 12 months, the number of teachers claiming job seekers allowance has fallen by 29%. And it is much lower, much lower than the rest of these islands. And if I could just say, Presiding Officer, the figure in August 2013 of job centre of the job seekers allowance claimants in education per 1,000 is 51.8% in Northern Ireland, 15.1% in Wales, 10.9% in England, and 4.7% in Scotland. So quite clearly we have focused very strongly on making sure that young teachers get into jobs, and we will continue to do so.
Mary Scanlon.
In remote rural areas, the availability of supply teachers, particularly in specialist subjects, is a reasonable concern, particularly for continuity of learning and also university entrance. Can I ask the Education Secretary if more could possibly be done in terms of distance and e-learning, video conferencing, and where appropriate, I appreciate it's not always possible, travel to another school?
Can I also welcome Mary Scanlon? There has been quite a reshuffle in the education ranks over the summer. It is a very good point that Mary Scanlon raises. There is always a potential for imagination in finding solutions to these difficulties. I've been to some schools in remote areas where, quite clearly, depending upon distance learning and e-learning, it's very important to provide a range of subjects. It may not be the best or most permanent solution, but imagination is needed where there is difficulty, and I would commend all education authorities, all schools, all head teachers who undertake that.
That ends topical questions. We now move to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 7787 in the name of Michael Matheson on new learning disability strategy, the keys to life, and I'll give a few moments for people to settle in their seats.